Hello everybody, welcome back to Anglo Election Insights. Had a quiet couple of weeks, but I'm back with a video on New South Wales, and I want to discuss the possibility of Chris Minns angering his left flank or alienating them enough to the point where it actually could cause him electoral headaches, despite the wider success of the Labor Party's move into the centre at the federal level and in other jurisdictions such as South Australia and to some extent WA. So you might remember that I did look at the potential pendulum in New South Wales maybe a couple of months ago now, I think, and we identified some seats where perhaps Labor was potentially a little bit vulnerable, particularly in Camden, but on the Liberal side the vulnerability looked a lot worse, and my hypothesis at that point was that polling had been a bit soft for Minns, but ultimately come election time I felt that he would be able to gain the upper hand and win a majority, and we'll get some sort of confirmation as to whether or not that could well be what plays out in the seat of Kiama, where they are having a by-election in a few weeks. However, in the meantime, I just want to talk a little bit about some commentary that I've seen recently about sort of the internal politics of the Labor Party in New South Wales, and how Minns is dragging the party so far to the centre that it is definitely alienating people on the left and even in the more progressive members of the Labor Party, the union movement, all of that, and how rather than necessarily displacing the Liberal Party, it's putting more people off on his left flank than gathering supporters on the right. So I thought what we would do firstly is just have a look at this poll here. So for a long time, the polls in New South Wales at the state level have been pretty soft, like surprisingly so, for first-term government that hasn't really made any particular blunders. But finally, Resolve Strategic have put out a poll about a month ago with Labor clearly leading on primary vote up against the coalition, and I think the two-party preferred was somewhere in the region of 57 to 43, so a sizable lead. And one of the features of New South Wales polling has been that Chris Minns has been well ahead of Mark Speakman as preferred Premier, and his personal favourability has been relatively good as well. So we can see here, no matter what the poll result, Minns has a clear lead over Speakman as preferred Premier. Now, one thing about midterm polling is that sometimes it can be good at capturing discontent, but when you ultimately get to the election period, you really find out where people are at, and sometimes the polling can move in ways that perhaps wasn't expected. So if we have a look at the polling over the entire federal cycle from 2022 to 2025, we can see Labor had a big lead in the early stages. There are polls that had the two-party preferred above 60% for Labor. Now, that was never likely to hold. You get I imagine it can't be easy to get a representative sample of vote intention when a government is in its honeymoon period. And I guess when a government first comes in, and they've just won a big mandate from the people, poll respondents perhaps are more inclined to say, yeah, we support that government, that's fine. But then later on, as they begin to accumulate baggage, as the battle lines get drawn, things tend to tighten up a little bit. That's quite normal, that's standard. So we saw over the course of 2024 and then into early 2025, the coalition actually took the lead. And this dot here, this is Resolve Strategic with their 55-45 lead for the coalition just before the end of March in 2025. So about, just before the election period, I guess, actually began, like the official campaign. And then we all know what happened. the campaign period proper started, Labor took a big lead and they never let up. And then, in fact, the final result was outside the kind of the general herd in terms of the final poll results in that last week of the campaign. We saw a similar thing play out in Tasmania, actually. In the middle of May, so just after the federal election, where in Tasmania there was a particularly large swing against the coalition, State Labor, on the other hand, had been trailing quite comfortably the Liberal Party, and then suddenly it flipped. I felt that it was without a particular cause at the local state level. After this poll, there was, of course, the no confidence motion, the new election, and then once again, just like as we saw in this poll here, where the coalition got a slight lead and then bungled it coming into the actual campaign, Tasmanian Labor more or less did the same thing. We saw they led one more poll from YouGov, but then the Liberals basically extended their lead all through the campaign period and then ultimately overperformed every one of the polls to grab a primary vote of a slither under 40%, while Labor were actually down on their 2024 result. So we just want to keep that in mind when talking about polls. And as far as this one from Resolve Strategic, we should probably put it into context. We also have this one most recently from Queensland, where they're actually giving Labor, they didn't do a two-party preferred reading. It's not actually much of a feature of their polling. They don't tend to publish the result or even ask for it necessarily. So it has been estimated that Labor have a slight lead here. And then this one from Victoria with the coalition only 1% ahead on primary vote. So again, a big narrowing. And I think what this demonstrates is that Resolve is getting a bit of a reputation for having or becoming quite a volatile pollster. Just remembering that they were the ones that gave the coalition the biggest lead just before the campaign period in 2025. And they were also the pollster that gave Labor about 22% primary vote in their worst polling, or the Labor's worst poll back at the start of this year. So keep that in mind. And if we have a look a little bit further down the page, so they also found federally that Labor had a 9% two-party preferred lead, which is more than what any of the other pollsters are posting. So it's mostly like sort of 6, 7, maybe 8% two-party preferred leads to Labor, but Resolve got 9%. So just keep that all in mind with regards to that last poll in New South Wales from Resolve. So on to kind of the meat of the video. Now, I'm not going to go into much detail about this, but there is certainly a sense from progressives and the Labor left that Chris Minns is dragging the party to the right, and because of optional preference voting in New South Wales, he could be endangering his electoral position to some degree, and I just want to kind of explore how that could play out. So firstly, the most recent sort of event in a long chain of events was the backlash that Chris Minns got from his handling of the Sydney Harbour Bridge protest, the pro-Palestine protest, a couple of weeks ago now. But then we also have this socialist magazine criticising Labor's policy of basically jumping into bed with developers in order to increase housing supply. And on this wider point, I found this article which was talking about how Labor now is really looking to pivot towards housing and increasing housing supply as their next sort of big electoral project. But then in New South Wales, particularly in Sydney, we have this issue with trains. There's been some disruptions that have actually made the national news, like big disruptions. And if that kind of thing continues, that does definitely cause political damage, particularly on the backdrop or against the backdrop of those difficult negotiations with the unions over pay and conditions, where the government isn't being seen to be giving out a whole lot. And then finally, Chris Minns is the Premier who has been the firmest on getting public servants back to office, and I think that could be a potential reason why some of the polling was quite soft for his government over the last year or so, even though Labor more broadly, particularly at the federal level, and then particularly again at the Victorian state level, are seen as kind of leading the working from home movement in the wake of the pandemic. So hopping back to the potential pendulum when it decides to load for me, here we go. I wanted to just have a look at some of these seats and kind of figure out how much Labor at the state level are going to be relying on preferences from the left in order to win some of these seats or hold some of these seats, and whether or not, without a significant gain of primary vote, they could actually be in trouble. So we'll start here by going through some of these Liberal marginals. So we've got the seat of Ryde, and we can see with the Liberals on 45% of the primary vote here, strong preference flow from the Greens in particular allowed Labor to nearly catch up. But if Labor are not able to get such strong preference flow from the Greens under OPV, this is the sort of seat where they just have no hope of catching up to the Liberals unless they can get their primary probably up to like 42-43%. So then, similar sort of story in Drummoyne, just being aware that there was an issue with the previous Liberal member. I think there was like an ICAC scandal or something like that, which might have dented the Liberal primary vote a little bit more than normal. But again, Labor here back on just under 40% of the vote, coming close to catching up, but there's no way they can do that without significant Green preference flow. Then we go to Terrigal up on the Central Coast. So this is an interesting one. This is an area where I think work from home was a particular issue for residents of the Central Coast. A lot of them, they face a pretty long commute down if they are ordered back to work in the office. And again, the Labor vote just under 40%, which, again, without that strong preference flow from the left, they risk not being able to catch up. Oatley, same thing, under 40%, the Labor vote won't be able to catch up if they don't get those preferences. Miranda, again, under 40% of the vote, the Liberals here on 45%. Close, but not going to be enough. So if Labor are going to try and pick up a majority at the next election, they need preferences from the left, or they need to really overperform on primary vote themselves. Goulburn, again, another one. The Liberal vote fairly low, mostly because of shooters, fishers and farmers, I would say. This is going to be an interesting seat because Wendy Tuckerman has just quit the front bench, or the shadow front bench. And I think there's actually a chance that she could defect to the Nats ultimately. I think this is a very different sort of seat. This isn't a seat where Green preferences are going to deliver Labor the win. I think it was more a case of right-wing preferences not flowing strongly enough to the Liberals to get them over the line. I'm not sure that's going to be such an issue in 2027. Winston Hills, once again, Labor under 40% of the vote, won't be able to catch up. And then finally in Tweed, the Labor vote quite low at 31, but the Green vote a little bit higher. This is a seat where you do have some spillover of those kind of alternative lifestyle communities from the Byron Shire region, which those preferences do tend to flow quite strongly to Labor. That is what happened here, but the Nationals with Jeff Provost as their candidate, very strong local member. If he retires, maybe that's a different story. So in basically all of those seats, it wasn't a straight shootout between Labor and the Liberals. There was that element of Green preferences that were very helpful to Labor in order to get the margins really close. But if it's true that Chris Minns maybe won't be getting quite such a good preference flow from the Greens and other left-wing parties, then again, he's going to have to really increase his primary vote, or the primary vote of Labor in some of these seats, or hope that the Liberals bleed support. So if we have a look at the Labor side, so Camden, really interesting seat. This is one where had you had forced preferential voting, perhaps One Nation preferences would have flowed strongly enough to the Liberals for them to get quite close, but the relationship between the state Liberals and the state One Nation party, not so good, and that was probably a key factor here in both suppressing the Liberal vote and ensuring that they didn't get a good enough preference flow to come from behind. The dynamic between those two parties could be different. One Nation could under or overperform. The federal brand is doing quite well, but the state brand is in a bit of a shambles, but One Nation state brand's being in a shambles but still getting a significant vote share is nothing new. Then we have the seat of Penrith. The Labor margin here is quite small, but I doubt that Stuart Ayres is going to be recontesting, a very strong local member. I think his personal vote played a large role in keeping the margin tight. Labor could probably expect to do a lot better here, but again, this isn't a seat where preferences from the left are decisive. It's sort of more of a straight shootout in primary vote between the Liberal and Labor Party. East Hills, a funny sort of seat, one that has been very marginal and then remained marginal after landslide years, or I think this was like one of the most marginal Liberal seats after 2011, and yet they still managed to hold it coming into 2015 despite the massive swing against them in 2015. Currently Labor hold it. Again, a little bit more of a shootout between the two major parties, but I've heard from some Green supporters in the comments and in the comments of other videos that they are considering preferencing the Liberals above Labor, Greens voters. So, if that dynamic plays out to the same extent, this is the sort of seat that the Liberals could win back. Then we have Monaro. I'm not even sure the Nationals are necessarily going to be the ones that recontest here. No reason why the Liberals couldn't, given that Queanbeyan is such a key part of this seat. But again, more of a shootout between the two major parties. So if Labor could increase their primary vote, they're probably going to be quite safe here. Then we have Riverstone. Here, Labor well ahead on primary, so they should be okay. But again, those Green preferences quite useful. If Labor is losing primary vote to the Greens and they're not receiving that sort of preference flow back, that could be a bit of a problem in a place like Riverstone. The entrance, good old Nathan Bracken contesting for the Liberals. Not sure how many of you guys are cricket fans, but he was a pretty handy left-arm fast bowler. Again, here, the Labor vote holding up reasonably well, but if that working from home edict from Chris Minns backfires and maybe the Liberals were able to get on the right side of that debate somehow, that could be an interesting seat to watch. And then South Coast, here, this is one that I found could be particularly interesting. So we'll see what happens in Kiama with preferences and primary vote share, that sort of thing. But if preferences from the right are flowing reasonably well to the Liberal Party and the Greens are attracting, quite a significant amount of primary vote, and that preference flow isn't translating into preferences for Labor strongly enough, this could be the sort of seat that might be in danger, although I do know that the recent trend has very much been in Labor's favour, and I don't necessarily see why that would stop. And then just back to this on the better Premier. So let me know in the comments, guys, where you think New South Wales politics is at for the Labor Party. It does seem that in terms of a battle between the Labor Party and the coalition, Labor have moved towards the centre and claimed ground that is electorally vital. We saw that at the federal level, and we saw the inverse in Tasmania, where the Liberals grabbed the centre and really displaced Labor. So is that all there is to it, or could there be an issue on Chris Minns's left flank? Could he be igniting NIMBY wars with his housing approvals and that sort of thing? Is this Palestine March stuff and some of the other issues in terms of the progressive politics and their relationship with the Labor right in New South Wales, is that going to cause fractures that will be enough to cause electoral headaches? You guys let me know. I don't follow New South Wales politics as closely as some of you guys, but I just wanted to get a video out that kind of explored how things might turn out if that is indeed the case. So thanks for watching, everybody. Hope you're having a great day. Please like the video if you enjoyed it, comment your thoughts below, and if you're new here and you are enjoying the content, I'd love to have you on as a subscriber. Thank you, everybody. Have a lovely day.